ethics, theology, sometimes mysticism. And today I wanted to share with you a story from the Jewish sources on law and authority, God's law and God's authority, that I think you might find interesting. Okay, so, usually we do controversial thinkers here like Alexander Dugin, Martin Heidegger in some cases, other topics. But in order to keep things uncontroversial, we'll just go into the question of Jews, God, law, and the Talmud, a nice uncontroversial topic. So this is a story from the Talmud known in English as the Oven of Akai. And just in case you want to find this source yourself, you can just search it for sure. But this website is sefaria.org, sefaria.org. And that's where I will be reading this story from. So I'm not actually going to be reading it word for word, but there are parts of it that I want to share with you. So the context here is that you have rabbis arguing over a point of law. And the point of law concerns whether a ritual oven is polluted or not polluted. Okay, can you use it for certain sacrificial purposes or not? There's a question here, okay? So I'll spare you the full details of the background, but the dispute is over the ritual purity of an oven. But, that's not the interesting part of the argument. The interesting part of the argument is how this dispute gets configured and what it is that it forces us to think about concerning the question of law and authority, God's law and God's authority. So the first thing you have to understand is that all of the rabbis take one position and a single rabbi takes another position. Okay, so you have a majority and an individual. Majority of rabbis take one position and a single rabbi opposes them. Okay, and the single rabbi, his name is Rabbi Eleazar. You can see here, Rabbi Eleazar answered all possible answers in the world to support his opinion. So he had a certain position on the ritual purity of the oven. He was able to marshal every possible answer that he had to support his opinion, but the rabbis did not accept his explanations. Okay, so then what happens? After failing to convince the rabbis logically, Rabbi Eleazar said to them, if the halakha, now halakha, if you don't know, means Jewish law. So if the Jewish law, if the law, okay, if the legal component of our Jewish tradition and Jewish teaching, if the halakha is in accordance with my opinion, in other words, if the law is on my side, he says, this carob tree will prove it. The carob tree was then uprooted from its place, 100 cubits, some say 400 cubits. So in other words, he says, if I'm right, this tree will jump out of the ground and move 3 meters down the road. And it does. And the rabbis said to him, one does not cite halakhic proof. Again, one does not cite legal proof. It's not legal evidence from the carob tree. Okay, so he said, basically, if I'm right, this little miracle will occur with the tree. It does occur, and they say, you know what? The tree miracle is not a legal argument, whereas this is a dispute over law. Rabbi Eleazar then said to them, if the halakha, the law, is in accordance with my opinion, the stream will prove it. The water in the stream turned backward and began flowing in the opposite direction. They said to him, one does not cite halakhic proof from a stream. So he gave them all the arguments he could. That didn't work. He gives them the miracle of the tree. That doesn't work. The miracle of the stream. That doesn't work. Okay, what do we have next? Rabbi Eleazar then said to them, if the halakha, the law, is in accordance with my opinion, the walls of the study hall will prove it. The walls of the study hall leaned inward and began to fall. Rabbi Yahushua, another rabbi here, scolded the walls and said to them, if Torah scholars are contending with each other in matters of halakha, in matters of law, what is the nature of your involvement in this dispute? In other words, he says to the walls, what do you have to do with this? A falling wall is not going to answer the question of the ritual purity of the oven. Now look at this beautiful detail. The walls did not fall because of the deference due to Rabbi Yahushua, but they did not straighten because of the deference due to Rabbi Eleazar, and they still remain leaning. It's a beautiful point. So you've got these rabbis arguing about a legal point, one taking one position, everybody else taking the other position. He says he's right, they don't buy it. He gives them arguments, they don't buy it. He says here's a miracle, they don't buy it. Then he says the walls of this study house will prove that I'm right. They begin to fall. The other rabbi stops them and says to them, what does a falling wall mean concerning a legal point? And the walls stay. They stay. They don't stay upright and they don't fall to the ground. The walls of the study hall combine somehow both rabbis' opinion. They kind of recognize in some sense the rightness of Rabbi Eleazar And at the same time, the justification of Rabbi Yahushua, who says, you don't really prove anything. That's a beautiful detail, I think, that the walls of the study hall are, they do not fall because of the deference due to Rabbi Yahushua. They did not straighten because of the deference due to Rabbi Eleazar, and they still remain leaning. Okay, in some sense, I think that's a nice image for the study of serious books, serious ideas, controversial topics. You know, somehow you have to recognize the truth that is on both sides, or the truth from both positions. And especially, you see, it wasn't the case with the carob tree. It wasn't the case with the stream, but it is the case with the walls of the study hall that they find a middle position. Okay, so we continue the story. Rabbi Eleazar then said to them, remember, Rabbi Eleazar is the one who believes that he's right against everybody else who believes that he's wrong. Rabbi Eleazar then said to them, if the halakha is in accordance with my opinion, meaning if the legal ruling or the law is in accordance with my opinion, if I'm right, okay, if the law is on my side, heaven will prove it. A divine voice emerged from heaven. So now you don't have the tree, you don't have the water, you don't have the study hall, okay, you don't have anything, as it were, material. You don't have the natural world. You have a divine voice emerges from heaven and says, why are you differing with Rabbi Eleazar? As the halakha, the law, is in accordance with his opinion in every place that he expresses an opinion. So now you have the divine voice itself coming down and saying, this rabbi is right and you are all wrong. Okay, you got to think about that. That's extreme and extraordinary situation. So what does this Jewish source tell us happens next in this famous story of the Oven of Akai? Rabbi Yahushua, okay, the rabbi who's on the other side of this dispute representing the majority, stood on his feet and said, it is written, it is not in heaven. Deuteronomy 30:12. I'll pull that up in a minute. The Gemara asks, what is the relevance of the phrase, it is not in heaven, in this context? In other words, there's some debate over what he means here. And this rabbi says the following: the Torah was already given at Mount Sinai, and for that reason, we do not regard a divine voice, as you already wrote at Mount Sinai in the Torah after a majority to incline. So let me pause for a minute because I want to explain this to you, and I actually want this to be the key part of the discussion. I'm hoping somebody has something to contribute valuably in the chat, in the comments. So you saw it, right? He's got arguments, they don't buy it. He appeals to the miracle of the tree, doesn't work. Miracle of the stream doesn't work. I mean, the miracle happens, but it doesn't work to convince the other rabbis. Then the divine voice itself comes down and says, he's right, you're wrong. And they say, stay out of this. Why stay out of this? Because you, let's say God, you, God, stay out of this. Why? Because you already gave your law. You already gave your law. The Torah is God's law. God has already legislated for the community. God has already said, this is the law. The law is supreme. The law is sovereign. Follow the law. And the law says, the law to which they're appealing, it says basically where there's a rabbinic dispute, follow the opinion of the majority. So on one hand, you have a single rabbi against the majority, and the law in some sense is on his side, like in the sense that he's right, apparently. His arguments are correct, apparently. He has decided rightly concerning the issue of the ritual purity of the oven. And at the same time, the law says you have to follow the opinion of the majority. And that's what the rabbis invoke. They say, you already gave us the law. And I think it's a very beautiful and interesting story. There's more, but I want to stop here for a minute to discuss a couple of things with you, because it's not just, oh, this is Jewish legalism. This shows you how the Jews are so legalistic that they'll reject Christ. Oh, I forgot. There's something I want to point out too, which is that I did a Twitter thread on this story, and you see some of the debates that it gave rise to. Maybe I'll pull it up in a minute here. But there's a deeper point, and the deeper point concerns the tension between the sovereignty of the law and the sovereignty of the lawgiver. The total absolute rule of the law and the moment where the law can be suspended for the sake of the law, or the moment where divine intervention, the moment where the word of the supreme being or the highest authority breaks through the confines of the law, says, no, maybe here we have an emergency situation, or here we have an exception, to remind you of the language of Carl Schmitt and other theorists of the suspension of the law, Giorgio Agamben, for example. So how would you make sense of this issue? A single rabbi against many rabbis, He apparently has the correctness of the argument, but according, and he's appealing to the law initially for the correctness of his argument. He's saying by law, this should not be considered a ritually pure oven. But at the same time, he can't convince any of the other rabbis, not a single one of them, with his arguments. Even though he's got natural miracles, as it were, to support him. Natural miracles don't prove anything, do they? Or what do they prove when your dispute is a legal one? And then the divine voice itself says you're right, but that same divine voice also gave the law, according to which, in a dispute like this, you have to follow the majority. So actually a pretty incredible story, I think. And it's, it's one of the well-known stories, or one of the better-known stories of the Talmud, from what I understand, not being myself a Talmudic scholar. And it's, I think one of the reasons why it's relatively well-known and discussed is because it raises more fundamental issues of law, authority, sovereignty, and even the status of the miracle. You could say fundamental issues in political theology, or in the problem of the relationship between theology and politics. So let's go back to the story. So the rabbi said, since the Torah was already given, since God's law was already given, we no longer need God's voice. We don't regard a divine voice. As you, God, already wrote at Mount Sinai in the Torah after a majority to incline. So they cite God's law from Exodus, and they say, we're just following your law. Since the majority of rabbis disagreed with Rabbi Eleazar's opinion, the halakha, the legal ruling, is not ruled in accordance with his opinion. And then years later, this is another amazing part of the story. Okay, this is the Talmud. That's what I'm reading to, part of the Talmud. The Gemara, which is another sort of commentary of this intratextual commentary, years after Rabbi Natan encountered Elijah, the prophet, and said to him, what did the Holy One, blessed be he, do at that time when Rabbi Yahushua issued his declaration? In other words, they asked the prophet Elijah, what did God do when the rabbi said to God, stay out of this legal dispute? It doesn't concern you anymore because you already gave your law. What did God do when he saw this playing out? Also pretty amazing question if you think about it. To have this in the Jewish sources itself, really, really amazing sort of meta reflection. And Elijah said to him, the Holy One, blessed be he, smiled and said, my children have triumphed over me. My children have triumphed over me. Truly amazing detail here that hopefully you have something, some thoughts on, and that you could share that in the chat or comments. My children have triumphed over me, says God, according to the prophet Elijah, about that moment when the rabbi said, stay out of this because we're already following the law that you gave us. In other words, we no longer need your direct intervention. We no longer need your direct authority. We no longer have to appeal directly to you. We are now ruled by the intermediary authority of your law. So after this, Rabbi Eleazar, the rabbi who was insisting that he's right all by himself, the one who invoked the jumping tree and the reversal of the stream and the falling of the walls, and who appealed directly to the divine voice, he was excommunicated from the group. So like another sort of detail, in a religious community ruled by God's law, can you appeal directly to God's immediate will? Can you go directly to the divine voice? What is the status of people like Rabbi Eleazar who skip over, in some sense, the sovereignty of the law and appeal directly to the divine voice that gave the law? Now remember, Rabbi Eleazar was not saying here that they should do something terrible. He was saying that in his view, and apparently he was right, in his view concerning the issue of the ritual purity of the oven, he appears to have been right. But he was wrong in insisting that they follow the correctness of his opinion rather than the other side of the legal equation, which is that the majority rules among the rabbis in a dispute. So, there are other cases in the history of political philosophy of somebody who is not unjust, and he's not trying to break the law in a bad sense, but he does end up in some way breaking the law out of appeal to the authority of a divine voice. Think about Socrates, for example, who had a divine voice, a daimonion. And he says in his apology, in his defense speech before the city of Athens in Plato's work, The Apology of Socrates, Socrates says that he wouldn't stop philosophizing even if it was against the law. So he appeals to something above the law. And he is not only excommunicated, but killed. That's Socrates. Okay, Rabbi Eleazar here is excommunicated. So, you have a puzzle that goes beyond, oh, Jews are legalistic and, Christians came to abolish the law and now what rules us is love, not law. Okay, some of that is in the background, possibly. For sure, some of you will have that on your mind, and I no doubt expect to see that in the comments. But I think the issue is more general and more difficult. And I can prove to you, in a sense, with no miracles, that it is more general and that it's more complicated. Because a great book that is neither Jewish nor Christian, which is Plato's Laws, I try to mention this now more and more in every live stream, not just because I have a course coming out on it, but because it's an incredible book. It opens with a question that is pertinent to the dispute whether God's law is sovereign or whether God as the lawgiver is sovereign over and above his law, whether you can appeal to a divine voice. In some sense, the meaning, politically and theologically, of a divine law, that's a huge, huge puzzle and a huge, huge problem. And that's the opening puzzle and the opening problem of this book, The Laws of Plato, which begins with the following sentence. One of the characters, the Athenian stranger, asks his two dialogue partners, an old Cretan and an old Spartan. He says, is it a god or some human being, strangers, who is given the credit for laying down your laws? And they say a god because each of them recognizes the source of their law to be a god. Zeus in one case, Apollo in the other. And then they are now in a context where any dispute about the law, any correction of the law, any development of the law, any critique of the law, any understanding of the law, anything concerning the law is now face to face with the problem that the lawgiver is divine. So if you think your lawgiver is divine and then you're contesting one of the laws, is that like an act of impiety against God? Is that an act of an unbeliever? Should you be excommunicated or killed? So this is just a story that I think you should know. Okay, I don't say you should go read the Talmud cover to cover. I'm no expert in it. I do think it's funny when it comes up in how could you put it, in the circles of those people who don't like Jews, and they point to the Talmud and say this is the source of all evil in the world. But actually, this particular story, which again you can search up as the Oven of Akai, find it, for example, on this page, sefaria.org, and discussed in other places in books by intelligent people. You can find this story and think about what is the significance, what is the legal significance of a miracle? Is there any relationship? I mean, think about Carl Schmitt and political theology. Somehow, if you have an exception to the law, a miracle is a kind of equivalent of an exception to the law. Okay, so Rabbi Eleazar answered every objection. The rabbis didn't accept his explanations. He said, this miracle will prove that I'm right. It did, and they didn't accept it. Because again, one does not cite legal proof from a stream. What does a falling wall have to do with my legal dispute? What does a miracle have to do with the substantive issue of the interpretation of a point of law? And then what do you do when there's a fundamental conflict in the law? Okay, those of you who are legal scholars in contemporary law may express your opinion about what you do when there's a fundamental conflict in the law. On one hand, it says so-and-so about ritual impurity, but on the other hand, it says if there's a dispute, follow the majority. Now, it seems like he should have followed the majority. That's the dispute resolution mechanism. Okay, so I just think it's very nice. Number one, what do you do about the source of authority in a political community that is under divine law or that recognizes a divine source of the law? Does God's authority somehow disappear once the law has been given? So you see this, it is written, it is not in heaven, Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 12. That's what Rabbi Yahushua said when the divine voice came down and said that, the one rabbi is right and you're all wrong. He said, look, stay out of this. Why does he stay out of it? Well, I have this up here. Let's just put it on screen. This is King James Version translation, Deuteronomy. Okay, we go down a little bit. We go down here. We go down here. So the Lord God will do this. The Lord God will do that. And thou shalt return and obey the voice of the Lord and do all of his commandments, which I command thee this day. All right, all kinds of commandments and laws. If thou shalt hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God to keep his commandments and his statutes, which are written in this book of the law, and if thou turn unto the Lord thy God with all thine heart and with all thy soul, things will be good and taken care of, and you'll have these blessings, and the Lord God will make thee plenteous. Everything will go well for you. For this commandment which I command thee this day, it is not hidden from thee, neither is it far off. It is not in heaven that thou shouldst say, who shall go up for us to heaven and bring it unto us that we may hear it and do it? Neither is it beyond the sea that thou shouldst say, who shall go over the sea for us and bring it unto us, that we may hear it and do it. But the word is very nigh unto thee in thy mouth, in thy heart, that mayest do it. Okay, so God says, the Lord says, these are the things that you should do. You will be blessed for doing them. Don't consider that this is a mysterious and a difficult thing. This commandment which I command thee this day is not hidden from thee, neither is it far off. It is not in heaven that thou shouldst say, who shall go get it for us, right? It's now been commanded. It's stated. It's open. It's patent. It's available. It's there. It's written. It's close. It's open. And so the rabbi says here to God, it is not in heaven. We don't need a mysterious divine voice to come resolve the dispute for us, because God himself has already said the commandment is clear. The rules are there. The writing is done. The law is made. So I think it's a very nice story, a very nice reflection, a very nice puzzle, dispute, debate concerning law and authority. And then, if you go, as I say, if you look it up, you'll find certain sorts of questions if you ever want to do a discussion group kind of thing. Certain proof texts here. You see, you shall neither side with the mighty to do wrong. You shall not give perverse testimony in dispute so as to pervert in favor of the mighty. Various kinds of proof texts related to the dispute that they had. And then these questions, why consider the end of this version of the story. In other words, there's a continuation, but if we stop it here, we say, what about this? That the prophet Elijah says, God said, my children triumphed over me, and he was happy about it. Why should God be happy that he was told to stay out of this legal dispute? That he's not needed anymore in some sense. His work is done. Somebody on the thread that I made, the Twitter thread, which I'll try to pull up for you because I think there was some good, just give me a minute. I have to sort of get it ready here. There were some good points that, maybe God wants to see his people, or the people who are under his law, or all of humanity, or however you want to think about it, mature to the point that they can now reason through the law and not have to appeal. Like, when my kids fight, I'll take this parental example for a minute as I set this up for you. When my kids fight, Dad, my sister, my brother said this and that. Resolve our dispute. That's what they're always saying, right? They tell me this, they tell me that. They have to come appeal to the authority to resolve every possible dispute. And as a parent, what do? You say, guys, here's the rule. Figure it out. We've been through this before. Figure it out. Reason it out. Solve it. You don't have to come, you don't have to write a letter to the White House every time your mail is 2 minutes late, or it's too hot outside, or you think the red light is too long. You have to find a way to resolve disputes that don't always appeal directly to the executive authority. And why wouldn't that be the same in the divine context? Can you always appeal directly to God? And then also, what kind of political community could you possibly have if everybody always appealed to the divine voice? How would you know? I heard it, you didn't hear it. Yes, God told me. How can you have a political community run on the miracle, run on the possibility of a miracle? How can you have a political community that's trans-legal? Now, you might think that the heart of the law is a miracle, which is true for the Jewish sources too, because the revelation of a code of law at Mount Sinai is a miracle. There's something above the law that legitimates the law, guarantees the law, secures the law, and assures its sovereignty. But once it's established, you can't just keep going over and above the law. That is a puzzle that is not inherently, yes, it's inherently Jewish in some sense, but it generalizes. That's why I showed you. I think it's a problem in Plato's laws. It's a problem in Aristotle's understanding of law. A problem like a puzzle, a problem like a fundamental tension. Okay, that's why Carl Schmitt and Walter Benjamin and these other authors, Giorgio Agamben, they all have to reason it through. And sometimes they invoke Jewish sources to help them do that, because it's helpful. Even the Messianic era as the era of the abolition of the law. These are all related topics. So before I go over to the Twitter, where I think we can also pull out just how some people responded to this story when I posted it there, I want to put you guys up on screen. Hang on a second here. 1 second. And keep in mind, okay? Keep in mind something I said before, but I have to say again. I'm not a rabbi, okay? I'm not a scholar of the Talmud. I just know from the point of view of my interest in political theology and problems of political philosophy and political science that story is an interesting one that I thought you might like to know. But I'm not capable of answering like every question that you might have and every question that's raised by it. But let's go to the comments anyways. So first of all, good to be with all of you. I appreciate you being here and listening in. Hopefully you found this to be a good topic and something you didn't know before. So William, good to be with you. Dewet, nice here. Yeah, a worry that the leftist diaspora is seeking to destroy Jews in Israel or seeking to destroy the Zionist project. That's possible. There's a tension, obviously, a deep tension between liberal and leftist Jews and their attitudes towards the state of Israel. And that's a big question there as well. Maybe independently of the story I read, maybe related to it in some sense, but yeah, appreciate that comment. William says physics is in exactly the same predicament. So William, you feel free to elaborate. I mean, in some sense, you could say that there are many different disciplines, including the discipline of the law, that have the logical or structural feature that there's a crisis in their foundations. That somehow you have on one hand, the positively constituted order. On the other hand, that which underlies it, secures it, legitimates it, and gives rise to it. And that there's always a certain, like the 0 and the 1. I had a nice conversation in my tutoring yesterday about this, expanding the idea of the foundations and what's built on them. You could think about it maybe in terms of the 0 and the 1, if that's helpful or not. And there's always this strange dynamic and interplay between them. And, what happens to those people who appeal past the positively constituted source of justification and legitimacy down to its sort of mysterious abyssal realm of constitution? Yeah, that's like the whole problem of, again, the exception. Sovereign is he who decides on the exception. So the law can't decide on its own exception. Only the person or the authority or the source that's above the law can do that. Very, very fascinating little dynamics built into that problem. From an Islamic perspective, God saying that seems insane, right? OMT, is abrogation impossible in Jewish law? Okay, I don't know the full details here. That's why I sort of wanted to, I can only narrow down my commentary to the story at hand. I don't know the full details, but hopefully you become curious enough, those of you who are watching, to dig into the details. I know there are certain, look, you should also know there are schools of Jewish theology or schools of Jewish, like sects of Jewish thought. Some of them are extremely orthodox. Some of them are, they have my understanding is that the story of the Oven of Akai, for example, is particularly influential in conservative circles, meaning not politically conservative, but conservative Judaism as a certain Jewish sect. So you've got Orthodox Jews, conservative Jews, Reform Jews, and they all have different attitude towards how much you can adjust the divine law. How much the law is progressive or not, how much it can be tweaked or not, and how pious or impious it is to interpret the law in a way that goes against tradition. All of these sorts of issues have given rise to different schools of interpretation, different legal schools within Judaism. So it may be, I heard not long ago, for example, an interview with a Reform rabbi, and the Reform rabbi had said that, look, even though it's an established part of Jewish tradition that Jewish identity is matrilineal, you're a Jew if your mom was a Jew, basically. And if your mom is not and if your mother is not, then your father is patrilineal, then technically speaking, you're not Jewish unless you undergo Jewish conversion. But there are different attitudes towards even that. For example, in Reform Judaism, as far as I know, they acknowledge patrilineal descent as one of the ways of passing down Jewish identity. So you see, there's no uniform, homogenous block called Jewish thought. And also there are different schools of interpretation of Jewish law. So LN, I told you, right? There would be a comment along these lines: Jewish arrogance knows no bounds, even when dealing with God's revelation and laws. So that's exactly in my opinion, the worst possible way to take something out of this video. It's like, oh yeah, we know that, this is Jews denying God or denying Christ and being arrogant, and aren't the Jews so bad? And Talmud is like, right? Now you're going to start posting like the Talmudic network memes on Twitter and stuff like that. It's one of the reasons I want to point out, this, right? Plato's laws. Do you say the same thing about Plato? Plato's arrogance knows no bounds when dealing with God's revelation and God's laws, and that's why Plato was cursed. It's a very lowbrow and stupid way of trying to deal with this story, no offense. Because as I've tried to say, the issue is, what is the relationship between law, authority, sovereignty, revelation, the miraculous, the need for a political community, the moral order on one hand, and that individual, for example, Socrates, who somehow can penetrate even more one step or two steps past the moral order. Socrates had his daimonion. The prophet Elijah here has the divine voice. There's somehow figures who are able to appeal beyond the law to the source of the law's legitimacy, but they then put themselves at odds with the political community. And that's a problem because, however much you might think, those quote unquote thinkers here who don't like this topic just because it happens to be Jewish, however much you might think that, oh yeah, Jews are bad because they're legalistic and everybody who abrogates the law is great because, suddenly you have mercy and love and everything else like that. In Christianity, in other fields, in Islam, and in pagan thought, if you want to call it that, classical Greek thought, Plato and Aristotle, the problem recurs that if you are dealing with community and political community, then you have the problem of the relationship of law to the source of law. And you also, it's kind of like if man is, or think about the first question of Plato's dialogue called The Laws. Is it a god or some human being, strangers, who is given the credit for laying down your laws? Do you say, he says to the Spartan and to the Cretan, who do you credit as being the source of the sovereignty of your law, man or God? And a lot hinges on that question. Because if you think that man made the law, then somehow you have a different set of problems. You have the problem of, well, who's man to make the law? Why did one person's word become the law? Was it just freely negotiated among the people? Does the law reflect the common will? Does the law reflect the general will? Are we talking about that's the source of law, is the general will? Have sort of like a democratic, egalitarian, horizontal, Rousseauian view of the legitimacy, authority, and source of the law? Or is the source of the law the great wisdom and intelligence of a single philosopher king, of somebody he can be the law for man because he's exceeded other men? There's all kinds of fundamental problems here that go way beyond whether you do or don't like Jews, is what I'm trying to say. Okay. Other comments here. Hunter, nice to see you. Like I said, I'm not an expert in the Jewish sources, but I wanted to share a story with you from the Jewish sources that I think resonates with some of the topics we discuss on this channel. Political theology, mysticism, the relationship of mysticism to politics, the limitations on, politics could be an obstacle to mystical insight could be an obstacle to political community. That's the fundamental tension somehow between the person who appeals above the law and everybody who's under the law, and all the other sorts of ways. So that's why I wanted to share the story with you. Chris, nice to see you. Other comments here. Again, Hunter, I appreciate that. It says you wouldn't be studying in yeshiva, wouldn't be studying Torah in yeshiva if it weren't for my teachings and comments that I've made on tradition. Appreciate that. That's good to hear. So those other comments as well. And is Jewish politics possible? The prophets in the Bibles are always in contradiction with the kings. I think the Hegelian notion is that the Christian state, like Christ, mediates between man and God. I'll tell you this, just on this point, it doesn't really answer your question, but I'll just make a comment about it, which is that Leo Strauss, he's got a piece of writing called, I think it was originally a speech, but you can find the written version of it, The Intellectual Situation of the Present, I believe it's called. And in that piece of writing, or in that speech, Strauss says about the significance of Nietzsche, that Nietzsche has reopened all the fundamental questions for us. He's shaken our complacency. He's shaken the sense of familiarity that we have with the answers that have been taken for granted in the past. And in particular, he says that after Nietzsche, we can now raise the question whether the prophets or the kings in the Bible are right. We no longer have to side immediately with the prophets. We can return more carefully to a study of the politics of the Bible. There's a good book on the book of Saul called The Beginning of Politics. Hold on a minute. What's it called? Just give me a second. Whoops. I shut you guys off screen. I'd like to keep you on there. There's a book called, The Beginning of Politics, which is on the book of Saul. A very nice point in that book, too, that political rulers, they're always in a space of ambiguity between moral justifications of their actions and self-interested justifications of their actions. In other words, with the example of King David and King Saul, that book shows that you never really know, did he do it out of self-interest and he just invoked moral motives or what? So anyway, the question of biblical politics is huge. There's another author, Leon Kass. I'll put his name here in the chat. Leon Kass, who has books on Genesis and Exodus, and I think the one on Exodus has some reflections on the politics of the Hebrew Bible, okay, or of the Old Testament. What else here? So, question: have I read Plato and the Talmud? Yes, I have read parts of it. That author's name, I'll put that here in the chat too. Jacob Howland, I think is his name. Correct me if I'm wrong. Book on Plato and the Talmud. Okay, I think it was through an interview that Jacob Howland did on this story, the Oven of Akai, that I first learned about it, and I first learned about its significance for political science or political theology, for this more general, not specifically Jewish context. Ahmed, nice to see you. Appreciate the comment. Some people have called Islam universalized Judaism. Such debates were also present in Islam. Yeah, again, everything I know about is this debates in Islam that mirror the concerns of Plato and Aristotle. I learned really through Strauss in his school. That's one branch of it, because they did write books on, for example, medieval Islamic political science, and Averroes and Al-Farabi and other sources in the Islamic world. And the other sort of little branch of Islamic thought that I'm interested in, I know more through Henri Corbin, and that's sort of the mystical dimensions of Islam. But yes, I think there's also some good notes in. I have it here behind me, probably. One of those yellow books in the guide of the perplexed. You have some commentary there on the similarity between what Maimonides is saying in the Jewish context and debates that were present in the Islamic or Arabic circles. Sorry, hold on a minute. Where are we here? Yeah, so. Okay, that's what I wanted to share with you. I appreciate your comments. Those are some authors you can look into if this topic was interesting. I'll just throw a few more in the chat here. People you should know who are writing about these topics, I said. So they're not Talmud scholars. That's not the correct way to think about them. Rather, they're writing about the relationship of God's law, God's authority, God's word, God's will, mystery and community, sovereignty and legitimacy. And there you do find very thoughtful reflection. So I'll just put a few of those people in the chat here. So Giorgio Agamben is somebody you should look into. And then the people that he mentions, okay? Walter Benjamin, in some cases, Gershom Scholem. Yeah, some of these people, but not all of them, are Jewish. Although they dispute the meaning of Jewish law and Jewish history and all of that. Leo Strauss, obviously, a big source for our understanding of the legal dimension of classical political philosophy. Great books like Plato's Laws. So keep that all in mind. And that's what I wanted to share with you. So once again, that story in the Talmud is called the Oven of Akai. The oven, I guess, it looks something like this. And the actual substantive issue that they were disputing was, again, is it ritually pure if it was like broken and then pieced back together? Something like that. Okay, if the parts of the oven, you see, if it was ritually impure and then you broke it apart and you put it back together again, is it still pure or impure? Something like that was the dispute, although that's not the part of the story that interests us, I would say. But if you want to look into the story, you got to look up this phrase, Oven of Akai. I read to you from Deuteronomy, that passage where it is written that the commandment is not in heaven, right? It's here with you now. It's been given to you. It's been told to you. You know it. So it's no longer hard to get, which means you no longer need to invoke miracles for its sake. You no longer need the divine voice for its sake. It's now just in your hands. And we had to look at that because that was what one of the rabbis said when God came down and ruled in favor of one of the rabbis. And then this other one said, God, stay out of this. You already told us it's not in heaven. We don't need your heavenly voice anymore because you yourself, heavenly voice, have told us no longer to appeal to your heavenly voice. That's another thing I want you guys to think about, okay? This story, the Oven of Akai, it is not a story of the Jewish community saying, or the rabbis saying, God, we reject you because we don't believe in you. No, you have to learn. You got to learn to read a little bit, right? Our reading comprehension level has to be like, we got to meet the challenge here. The rabbis do not say, God, stay out of this because we don't care about your opinion. They don't say, God, stay out of this because we don't believe in you. They don't say, God, stay out of this because we, whatever, right? Worship the devil. No, why do they say? Why does the Rabbi Yahushua say God, stay out of this. I mean, this is minimal. This is the basic thing that you have to be able to think through here. By the way, he doesn't say stay out of this. That's my paraphrase, okay, to make it dramatically interesting and to help you remember it and to make it stick, okay? But he doesn't say stay out of this. He says, he cites God back to God. It is not in heaven. God's not staying out of it. God is the source that they're appealing to. But they're appealing to God's law and to that part of God's law that said, you don't have to go beyond the law. You don't have to cross the river. You don't have to go to heaven. You don't have to search far and wide. The law is in your hands now. So that's the puzzle that you have to try to interpret. Not, oh, this is the Jews rejecting God. And it's just, Jews rejecting Jesus or something like that. Oh yeah, I said I would show you the Twitter. Sorry, I'm going to do that in a second. That's the puzzle. That's the puzzle. God himself gave the law that says, now that you have the law, you don't need to appeal directly to me. That's what you have to make sense of. Okay, so now, just quickly to the comment that Erdem made about releasing the video of this stream, it's gonna be on my channel. Okay, so once these live streams are over, they just become part of the repository of my YouTube channel, which, by the way, might as well, obligatory request here. Like the video if you like it, share it if you think anybody else would like it, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of these, and so on. And yeah, so we got a very basic problem of law here. And again, I see another comment, it's Jews rejecting Jesus. I mean, I can't help you, right? You can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And I can put you before a question, but I can't make you think. But for those of you who understand the problem of the sovereignty of law, well, that's what I hope you get a chance to think about and a chance to comment on. So let's see if there was anything that was added by the people who commented on my, why can't I see it? Probably because I'm not logged in. So anyway, fine. I won't read you the comments. They're basically kind of what you see here. People saying that it's just Jews rejecting Christianity, or it's just Jews being Jews or something like that, which, I'm not sure what else I can say to try to convince you that it's a more fundamental problem of law here. What do you do when the law contradicts itself? What do you do when there's a contradiction between the sovereign telling you, now that you have the law is sovereign over you, and then you appeal to the sovereignty of the law maker instead of to the sovereignty of the law? Okay, these are all just fundamental issues. So that's what I wanted to share with you. I'm satisfied that we did a pretty good job introducing you to the story at any rate. Okay, and I mentioned to you that the story is called the Oven of Akai, Akhnai. I mentioned to you what I learned from this page, that few stories from the Talmud are more woven into the theology of conservative Judaism than this particular story, which you can read about if you'd like to. And just try to interpret it. I think that's a very important thing to do. Now, keep in mind, you don't have the full context. We're not Talmud scholars, okay? I'm no rabbi. I'm picking out a single story here that I think has general and broad significance given our interest in political theology on this channel. But try to interpret it, try to make sense of it. Look at the text, think about it. What does a miracle prove with respect to a legal point? And keep in mind, I got to show you one other thing, okay? Here's an example of how I would interpret this text. I'm going to give you just a simple detail, not a full-blown interpretation, a simple detail. So imagine that I say, like I just said, what does a miracle tell us about a legal point? Okay, so here's the question. What does a miracle, like the carob tree jumping, that was a miracle apparently, or the stream flowing backwards, that was a miracle. And that's what he said, right? He's like, this miracle is going to prove that I'm right, and they rejected that as a proof. So you say, what does a miracle tell you about a legal dispute? And let's see these two paragraphs, or this paragraph here that's on screen, these two examples that are on screen. You might say, according to this text, a miracle proves nothing concerning the law. You might think that. According to this text, a miracle proves nothing concerning the law. Now, I want to give you two counter arguments, okay? One that is from the text and one that's implied. Start with the one that's implied. It's like strongly implied, okay? I'm saying implied here, but it's almost patent, but let's call it implied. And that is that at the source of the law, there is a miracle. The giving of the divine law is a miracle. But you can't appeal to miracles in the application or adjudication of the law. Okay, so the question, what's the relationship between a miracle and the law? First possible answer, this text shows us that miracles don't interact with the law, because when he tried to give a miraculous proof, that was rejected. Counter argument number one, there's a miracle at the source of the law. There's something miraculous about the lawgiver, about the origin of the law. Okay, obviously in the case of divine law, but maybe even also in the case of human law. There's something somehow miraculous about the source of the law, but the adjudication and application of the law can no longer appeal to miracles. That's number one. That's the implicit, as I said, argument. But now let me give you an explicit argument, a direct proof from the text that no, it's wrong to conclude that this story teaches us there's no relationship between the miracle and the law. What is it? Well, we had the example of the tree. You have the example of the stream. You also have the example of the study hall. What was the example of the study hall? He says the walls of the study hall will prove that he's correct, and the walls of the study hall begin to fall. In other words, we're calling that a miracle. Okay, he appealed to something happening not because somebody pushed over the wall, but in a miraculous sort of way. And the other rabbi says to the wall, what do you have to do with this dispute? Nothing. And what happens? The walls did not fall. Okay, so they did not fall, but they also don't straighten. They remain in the middle. So that didn't happen with the tree, and it didn't happen with the stream, but it did happen with the walls. And this shows you that somehow the study hall, as I mentioned earlier, the study hall incorporates a kind of medium position. It takes into account both the law and somehow the miraculous appeal to the substantive truth of the dispute. Okay, you have to see that the text itself gives us one example that is not like the others. And that's how you would have to begin to interpret, I think, a story like this. Not just, Jews hate Christ. How could you possibly make any progress in understanding anything unless you actually look at what was said and think about it? Okay, I don't see any other way besides looking at what was said and thinking about it. So I wanted to mention that. And then one other detail, again, if you ever get skilled in interpretation, and I'm not suggesting that I'm particularly good at it, and as I mentioned, I'm not a Torah scholar and so on, but another little detail here is this. After failing to convince the rabbis logically, Rabbi Eleazar said to them, if the halakha, the law, is in accordance with my opinion, this carob tree will prove it. Okay, remember that? The appeals to the tree's going to jump, and that's going to be proof that he's right. That's right. That's like, guys, if I'm lying, lightning will strike me dead. It's that sort of thing, okay? The carob tree was uprooted from its place. And then here's the little detail I wanted to point out. The carob tree was uprooted from its place 100 cubits, and some say 400 cubits. Now, why is that a nice little detail? Because it shows you, maybe, or it suggests, maybe, that when it comes to miracles, you have the dispute over what some say. You know, some said it was 100 cubits. Some said it was 4 times that far. You know, he jumped. How high did he jump? Oh, a meter, but some say it was 10 meters. He was big. How big was he? 6 feet, but some say he was 60 feet. You know, where does the fact of the miracle get exaggerated if there was a fact of the miracle? Does that make sense to you? The carob tree was uprooted from its place 100 cubits. Some say 400. The fact that that's there, that some say 400, indicates to us, in my opinion, that we have to think about quote unquote miracles. Now, this is not denying that there are miracles. It can't be, because the giving of the divine law is itself a miracle. But what people say about miracles, and that we don't actually know the full fact. Well, I mean, maybe we know that it was uprooted, but we don't know how far it was uprooted, okay? But to read and to interpret something, I'm giving you a minor example here. You know, but if we're going to think, then they have to think through what's there. Now, you know, eventually you can think through what's implicit, what's between the lines, what's background knowledge, what's context, what you know from other stories. Maybe there's 20 other stories in the Talmud about Rabbi Eleazar, and it's very helpful to know them in order to know what he said here. 20 other stories about Rabbi Yahushua, and it's very helpful to know what he said in order to know what's happening here. That's possible. But at the very least, we have to know what's being said here too. Okay, so I think that's going to be it for this live stream. There was something else that I wanted to read to you, just an article that I saw that came out on a different topic here. Although I think you wouldn't have to twist my arm for me to make a connection between the problem that we were just discussing concerning law and artificial intelligence, large language models, truth in its relationship to machines. Again, I think that's a related problem. You know what? Maybe we'll just, let's treat it like a related problem. Let's just go with this article. So I was maybe thinking they're too tenuously connected, but no, we're going to go over it. So the perpetual quest for a truth machine. Can there be such a thing as a truth machine? Is that the same thing as trying to legalize the miracle? You see? As trying to capture in an orderly fashion, that's the machine, that which is greater than anything that can be captured in an orderly fashion. That's the truth. This is a topic that recurs across different fields. We just gave the example of how it's present in political theology and the problem of law, but it's also present in problems of mathematics, present in problems of consciousness, present in systems of symbolism. I'll show you. I'll give you a quick example of what I'm talking about. Oh, where is it? 1 second. I was just showing this book the other day. Oh yeah, here it is. What's going on here? Why can't I go back to the big screen? Oh, okay, here we go. Here's a book called The Phenomena of Awareness. Okay, you see the author, Cecile, Cecile, Tougas, Tougas, for those of you who aren't watching but just listening. Phenomena of Awareness. Husserl, phenomenological philosopher. Cantor proved that some infinities are bigger than other infinities using set theory. And Jung, psychoanalyst and symbolic interpreter of dreams and the deep subconscious. What in the world could possibly bring together, Husserl, Cantor, and Jung, awareness and all this issue? It's because there's something structurally similar going on across these several domains that I discussed to you earlier as the problem of the zero and the one, the problem of the foundations and what's constituted on top of them. And in particular, very clear in the case of Cantor and set theory, that there's always something that exceeds formalization. So that's true of the miracle and the law, and it could be true here of truth and truth machines. So let's read this article now, published at nautil.us, nautil.us, okay, Nautilus, The Perpetual Quest for a Truth Machine, written by Kelly Clancy, published a couple of days ago. All right, just give me a second here to have my coffee again. I'm Michael Millerman. I like to talk about these sorts of topics with you. If you enjoy this, feel free to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss these videos. And as usual, if you like it or comment on it or do something else, I'd be really happy. Oh, hello. Hi, Mom. Nice to see you. So here we go. This is an article on truth machines. In the 13th century, the young married patrician Raymond Lull was living a licentious life in Majorca, lusting after women and squandering his time writing worthless songs and poems. His loose behavior, however, gave way to a series of divine revelations. Okay, so again, we're right in the realm of the divine, right in the realm of divine revelation, right in the problem raised by that occurrence. So it gave way to a series of divine revelations. His visions urged him to write what he believed would be the best book conceived by a mortal, a book that could converse with its readers and truthfully answer any question about faith. So you might say like a book of divine law, a book of divine revelation. Okay, he would write the best book conceived by a mortal, a book that could answer any question truthfully. It would, in a sense, be an early chatbot, a mechanical missionary that could be sent to the farthest reaches of humanity to convert any unbeliever with undeniable truths about the universe. Europeans had spent the past 2 centuries attempting to win hearts through blood-drenched crusades. Raymond Lull, was determined to invent a linguistic device that would communicate a higher truth not through violence, but fact. I should add here just in passing that some of those other authors I mentioned earlier, when they think about law, they do think about it in relationship also to violence, because it seems like one of the things that you have to have when you have law is the force of law. And you saw that in the story about the rabbis where the rabbi is excommunicated. And you see it in the story of Socrates, where Socrates is sentenced to death and killed. Okay, his main works, going back to the article here and referring to Raymond Lull, his main works, known collectively as Ars Magna, described a sort of logic machine, one that Lull claimed could prove the existence of the Christian God to even the most stubborn heretic. Lull likely took inspiration from the Zayirja, another combinatorial device which Muslim astrologers used to help generate new ideas. In the Zayirja, sorry for the pronunciation, letters were distributed around a paper wheel like the hours on a clock. They could be recombined to answer questions through a series of mechanical operations. Lull divided his machine's paper wheels into fundamental religious concepts, including goodness, eternity, understanding, and love. Users would rotate a series of concentric paper discs mounted on threads to combine different divine attributes into logically true statements. Okay, it's interesting. It's like, you guys know, Muslims who are watching this right now, you know, there's probably that book, 99 Beautiful Names of God, or 99, I think that's what it's called, right? 99 Beautiful Names of God. So imagine that you now had a permutation device where you can generate true statements about God through the mechanical permutation of his 99 beautiful names. Okay, it was hardly a turnkey system. Potential converts would have to study for months to be able to consult it. And Lull's obsessively detailed examples obfuscated rather than revealed how the machine worked. But his hope to derive truth through the reduction and mechanical recombination of knowledge into basic principles and terms prefigured contemporary computing by nearly 800 years. Although Lull was certain his logic machine would demonstrate the truth of the Bible and gain new Christian converts, he was ultimately unsuccessful. One report has it that he was stoned to death while on a missionary trip to Tunisia. Okay, incidentally here, something that also belongs to the problem of political theology, the fact that you can have a conflict in your understanding of God's law if you go to another community with its own understanding of God's law, and that in some cases that conflict can lead to violence and death. Humans exist at an uneasy threshold. We have a dizzying ability to make meaning from the world, braid language into stories to construct understanding, and search for patterns that might reveal larger, more steady truth. Yet we also recognize our mental efforts are often flawed, arbitrary, and incomplete. Woven throughout the centuries is a burning obsession with accessing truth beyond human fallibility, a utopian dream of automated certainty. Lull and many thinkers since hoped a sort of machine could operationalize logic through language to end disagreements, and perhaps even war, opening access to a single indisputable truth. This has been the seduction of modern computers and artificial intelligence. If our limited human minds can't alight or agree on pure rational truth, perhaps we could invent an external one that would use language to calculate our way there. I'll interrupt the article for a minute. I was at a startup fest, gathering of financiers and entrepreneurs in Montreal. It's actually today's the last day. I couldn't go today, but I was there the last couple of days. They had a panel on truth and AI, interesting series of presentations on truth and AI for entrepreneurs and business people. And in some of those presentations, you could feel this aspiration operating sometimes behind the scenes that AI can be a truth-producing machine. And if you have a truth-producing machine, then you can end disagreements, which are often premised on the idea that somebody thinks he knows what's true, but wants, can't prove it or whatever. And incidentally, again, very much related to the debate between the rabbis. Could you solve the dispute that the rabbis had in the story of the Oven of Akai with a truth machine? Apparently not, because they ran into a contradiction that they weren't clearly able to resolve. But at any rate, back to the article here. So the seduction of modern computers and artificial intelligence has been to operationalize logic through language to end disagreements and perhaps even war, opening access to a single indisputable truth. For at least a millennium, humans have attempted to take these two marvelously malleable and uniquely human abilities, abstract thinking and divine language, and outsource them to something more rational. In the 17th century, mathematician Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz created a mechanical but descriptive logic machine. In Dissertatio de Arte Combinatoria, published in 1666 when he was 19, Leibniz proposed that all concepts could be described as combinations of simpler concepts, in the same way words are composed of letters. Leibniz admires Lull's Rs, the combinatorial, Lull's idea of this combinatorial truth machine, but found it lacking. Its basic concepts were too arbitrary. Why goodness, eternity, and love, for instance, and not others? To mechanically simulate logic, Leibniz suggested we needed to discover the full alphabet of human thought, the basic set of concepts from which all others could be constructed. It would be a divine language that, as he wrote in a later letter, perfectly represents the relationships between our thoughts. Guys, I want to pause for 1 minute and just remind you, if you like this topic of large language models and what they mean about our insight into the divine, I did do a video not too long ago on Jordan Peterson, who made a claim along those lines that large language models help us to clarify our concept of God. I thought that in the example I go over in the video is poorly implemented, but we can imagine an example that is much better implemented. And you can think there about whether this aspiration for a combinatorial truth machine has or doesn't have promise for insight into the nature of the divine. But let's go back to the article now. Leibniz hoped this would lead to the language in which God wrote the universe, one in which no untruth could be spoken. Leibniz believed his own mother of all inventions would usher in utopia, accelerate science, and perfect theology. He hoped to create a machine that could provide certainty in any realm, be it politics or philosophy, medicine or physics. Lines of reasoning in any field would become as tangible as those of mathematics, he wrote. Instead of disagreeing, people would feed their questions into this logic machine, declaring, "Let us calculate without further ado to see who is right." I have to pause again and tell you that Aristotle, for example, in some of his questions, he said, there are some fields where you shouldn't seek the same sort of certainty that you seek in mathematics, because not all fields lend themselves to mathematical certainty. And you should just try to get as sure as you can given the subject matter of those fields. But here you have the aspiration in Leibniz that you can bring everything under the dominance of mathematical reasoning, of reasoning that produces true, verifiable, certain, and operationally well attested to results. In short, calculation. Like Descartes before him, Leibniz believed truth could be discovered through reason alone. Jonathan Swift, for one, ridiculed the notion. In his 18th century satiric novel Gulliver's Travels, Swift portrayed scholars at the Grand Academy of Lagado using an engine to write books. A spoof of Leibniz's machine, the Lilliputian engine consisted of a wire mesh string on which hung dice inscribed with words. Scholars would hand crank the wires to spin the dice and create new combinations of words. Philosophers would then record these combinations into books without the least assistance from genius or study. Okay, so a mockery of combinatorial linguistics. Undeterred by such public scoffing, scholars continued to try to build a truth-generating machine. English mathematician George Boole had a visionary insight at the age of 17 into the nature of mind and how it accumulates knowledge. Decoding this vision became his life's work. Like Lull and Leibniz, he grew obsessed with the idea of creating a system of language that could put disagreements to rest and calculate truth by mathematical certainty. This led Boole to his 1854 book Laws of Thought, in which he pioneered a novel form of logic predicated on a new measure of truth, yes or no. Previously, algebraic variables like x stood in for numbers, but what if these variables stood for something else? Ideas, for example. What if we could perform algebra on ideas to calculate whether they're true or false, and combine these to come to other logical conclusions? Boole demonstrated that he could turn Aristotle's logical propositions into mathematical equations. The proposition all men are mortal could be expressed as y equals vx. Though Boole was delighted to learn that Leibniz had tried to work out a similar language, he was disappointed that his own work had only captured the interest of mathematicians. According to his wife, Boole meant to throw light on the nature of the human mind. Instead, Boole's logic found no immediate practical application and was relegated to the dusty corners of philosophy departments. And I assume that those of you who do any sort of programming or has done any sort of logic, you all know and have encountered Boolean logic. In the 1930s, in one of these philosophy departments, Claude Shannon, an undergraduate at the University of Michigan, was introduced to Boole's ideas. Being a fan of puzzles, Shannon enjoyed symbolic logic and would go on to realize its full potential while a master's student at MIT. There he worked as a research assistant to Vannevar Bush, helping visiting scientists use Bush's giant mechanical calculator to solve their research problems. After repeatedly adjusting the unwieldy machine, he realized he could simplify the calculator's fussy spinning disks and control relays using Boolean logic. In his world-changing master's thesis, Shannon demonstrated how Boolean logic could optimize the routing of telephone switches. Using these ideas, engineers could design circuits to perform calculation and control. Shannon's insight would serve as the foundation for modern computing, giving rise to the stream of zeros and ones that now innervate the digital realm. Shannon's work promised to finally transmute messy human thought into the organized language of logic, perhaps even in pursuit of truth. Speaking of which, I want to show you if I have a book here by my side. 1 second. say? Yeah. So you should know, if you don't, I'm going to interrupt the article reading for a minute, just tell you something. The issue concerning the essence of logic. Logic and the rules of thought. Is that what logic is? Logic, the rules of thought? And can the rules of thought be mathematized? And then suddenly can the human mind be calculated? Okay, that's sort of one of the basic ideas around AI and what you're reading here. But in order to truly get to the foundations, the presuppositions, the axioms concerning what logic can and can't accomplish, what calculation can and can't accomplish, what does it mean to try to calculate thought and all of that, it's a very rich topic. And one of my favorite teachers and writers and thinkers, somebody I talk about on this channel all the time, I've written books about and have courses on, Martin Heidegger. He has this book, for example, Logic, the Question of Truth. And in other books of his, a similar sort of topic is addressed. And if you really want to get into, I think, the question of calculation, computation, and understanding, at some point you really have to take Heidegger seriously. There are people in AI and cognitive science and computer science who studied Heidegger and who wrote about him. I have discussed that elsewhere. You can look it up, Heidegger and AI, and you'll see the most prominent of them, but there's no substitute for getting into Heidegger yourself to help you understand what's implied by even the project of trying to mathematize and calculate the human mind. All right, so let's go back to the article here. In 1913, the Russian mathematician Andrei Markov had sat down and tallied how often letters of the alphabet appeared in the first 20,000 words of Alexander Pushkin's novel, Eugene Onegin. He also tallied letter pairs and found that if you randomly picked a vowel from the text, the most likely next letter would be a consonant, and vice versa. Letters weren't peppered randomly throughout, but obeyed underlying patterns. Okay, 1913, Andrei Markov does a computational linguistics on Alexander Pushkin's novel and finds some regularities. Shannon expanded on this insight to create an early kind of language model. When he picked letters randomly from the alphabet, he generated a gibberish string, which you see here shown, XFOML space RXKH, etc., etc., okay? A gibberish string. But when he drew from piles of letters with the same frequency of natural English pairs, he generated something that looked a little more like English, and which, if you're just listening and you can't see it, is in space, no space, ist space, lat, way, kratic, frere, burs, grossid. So it looks more like a normal English sentence than the gibberish string. The more conditional information he included, the more real the output sounded. In this manner, Shannon laid the groundwork for models that mimic higher order statistics of natural languages. Okay, I want to pause here again. If you like this idea of computational linguistics, or how can you get sort of a standard computational procedure to produce English-like speech, I thought that a very nice presentation was Stephen Wolfram. I think it's called How ChatGPT Works. 3-hour PowerPoint presentation and lecture. And that's what I recommend you watch, okay, if you want to go deeper into this, Stephen Wolfram's lecture, How GPT Works, How ChatGPT Works. By the 1960s, engineers had evolved this predictive technology to the extent it was already duping humans. Many users of that decade's chatterbot Eliza attributed a surprising degree of understanding to even its repetitive diction. Its creator, Joseph Weizenbaum, had intended Eliza to be a parody of psychotherapists and was surprised that it captivated users. Okay, I have to pause one more time to tell you there's a book called Understanding Computers and Cognition, written by some Heideggerians. It's from the 80s. I believe I have a video on it as I made just for members of my school, but maybe I'll publicize it because I think it's nice to share more broadly. But it has an introduction, I believe, by this Joseph Weizenbaum, the creator of Eliza. Okay, that book is called Understanding Computers and Cognition. Today's large language models, pioneered by Google, were popularized by researchers at OpenAI who noticed that the larger they made these models, the better the models scored on performance benchmarks. Ask ChatGPT to summarize the history of French military victories or alternative theories to dark matter, and it will appear an eager and instantaneous research assistant, ready in no time with an authoritatively phrased answer. Current language models are trained by turning language into a guessing game rather than as an engine pointed towards larger truths. Random words are hidden from training text lifted from the cacophonous internet. The programs learn to guess which words are likely to fill these gaps, and in so doing learn the complex web of dependencies that drive language. Like Swift's engine, they spin through possible word combinations without concern for the truthfulness of the final formulated text. Because they've only learned to mimic the statistics of our messy language, they can't represent the difference between fact and fiction. Okay, so they're not able to break through to the truth. They don't have a standard for what is the truth. They can only mimic things statistically. It might be said that ChatGPT is bullshit, as the title of one recent paper co-authored by philosopher of science Michael Townsend Hicks asserts. Maybe we'll have to read that on a separate live stream. Citing the philosopher Harry Frankfurt's definition of bullshit as speech intended to persuade without regard for truth. Instead of an externally calculated, more pure truth, these machines are distilling and reflecting back to us the chaos of human beliefs and chatter. The hope remains that we might scale these models indefinitely to reach the point of general intelligence. That is, more extrapolation than certainty. The models may already be coming to a point of diminishing returns, given they require an immense amount of data for minimal improvements in their performance. In fact, the LLMs of today are missing something even Lull and Leibniz believed was essential to their machines: reason. While language models can use logic to some extent, they make many of the same reasoning mistakes humans do, being trained as they are on our data. But unlike humans, language models can't self-correct to come to a better answer. In fact, reflection seems to make their performance worse, as researchers at Google DeepMind discovered. So just imagine, I mean, it might be impossible to imagine a truth machine, something where any question you ask it, it can give you the true answer, and it has logic and it has reasoning and it does everything solidly in that sense. But I do think it's worth considering, how is that like or unlike the aspiration of a divinely revealed code of law? After all, you know that there are people who treat the idea of a super intelligent truth machine as God-like. And naturally, there are other questions here that this raises, that some of which I've mentioned before on this channel. Is truth even the right thing to aspire to at all times, in all cases, for all people, under all circumstances? The reason that's a question is because if you read the first 10 pages of Plato's Republic, which after all is a book that teaches us something important about politics, then you see Socrates is asking, if you had a friend who lent you a weapon and he asks for it back, but you know that if you give it back to him, he's going to kill somebody with it because he's not in his right state of mind, should you tell him the truth? Is it just to tell him the truth? And is it just to give him back his weapon? It is his after all, but somehow he's no longer in the same state of mind or in the right state of mind. Do you owe him his weapon, and do you owe him the truth? Is it ever right to lie? Well, what do you do with a truth machine that's been trained to tell the truth even when it's right to lie, if it ever is? Okay, that's a recurring topic, I think, when it comes to the issue of truth telling. You can't think about truth and justice without thinking about the first 10 pages of Plato's Republic, in my opinion. But okay, let's just read this last little paragraph here. In the end, truth machines haven't progressed much from Lull's Ars Magna. The 13th century zealot hoped to automate truth to dispel people's uncertainty. Instead, we've automated the uncertainty. Perhaps the elusive truth about the universe does not lie in the Baroque feverish rumblings of Lull's Ars Magna. Perhaps the elusive truth about the universe does lie in the Baroque feverish ramblings of Lull's Ars Magna. If only somebody could decipher it, just don't ask ChatGPT. All right, so the idea here is not that a truth machine is impossible, which I think is also worth considering, but it's that today's large language models are akin to past efforts, except that they don't reproduce truth, they just reproduce statistics, and statistics can be as truthful as not, okay? The statistical occurrence of language pairs and token pairs and word pairs and all the rest of it. So again, I was going to read this originally on a separate stream, The Perpetual Quest for a Truth Machine, but I do think that the idea of mechanizing logic and trying to operationalize truth, and even the view that truth is the final arbiter of all things in all cases, which according to Plato's Republic is not accurate. I do think that that relates directly to basic problems of political theology, and therefore sort of spontaneously figured we'd cover these two articles or these two topics together. So a quick review. First of all, those of you who are here, I appreciate you being here. It's nice spending time together. My name is Michael Millerman. I teach at millermanschool.com and obviously on this channel. I write at millermanschool.substack.com. And I'll just, funnily enough, since I don't really think anybody cares, so I'll just mention it in passing with no embarrassment about it. So I used to make music. I haven't really made any recently. You can see it at millerman.bandcamp.com. And a long time ago, 2008, I had Raymond Lull in mind here. You see? Raymond Lullaby. That was my little Raymond Lull song there. Raymond Lullaby, okay? So that's Raymond Lull, okay? The great mystic who wanted a truth machine, a combinatorial truth machine. So what else did we look at? We looked at the Oven of Akai story. I told you what it's called. I told you where you could find it. Told you some things about it. Sefaria.org, sefaria.org. We read the relevant passage in Deuteronomy, okay, the King James Version. And that's that. So thanks very much for being here. Like, share, subscribe, comment. I'm always open to ideas as well. If there's anything else you'd like me to see, discuss on the channel, I take that into consideration and do what I can. Take care. Be well. Goodbye.